You gotta be kidding me. Go to the highest point of the island, they said. It'd be fun, they said. You'll have amazing views, they said. Yeah. To give you a bit of perspective, the angle of the hill is like that. Yeah. Come on, Ethan, you can do it. And it keeps going. Don't need to do leg day today, I'm telling you. Whew. Next time, I'm taking the road up. Right. So after trying to make my legs fall off, I am finally up at the highest point of the island. We are now where Fort George is. As at this point, back in 1814, the American forces assaulted to attempt to retake Mackinaw Island. Now, they were up against quite the formidable sight. The British had in the woods here surrounding the fort all of their Native American allies. Now, by the time that the Americans landed back on what is now called the British Landing, the British had already known that the Americans were going to take this fort. And the British were desperate to keep this out of American hands. Now, you might be wondering to yourself, why would the British so desperately want to keep this fort? Well, if I turn around, this is the reason why. This is the Straits of Mackinac. And if I can get around up here a bit more to get a better view, you will see that in the 17 and early 1800s, this would have controlled everything. Now, in the beginning of the video, you saw me hike up here. To give you a bit of a perspective, that down there are massive horses and a carriage. Now, Mackinaw Island, you can do tours through these across the entire island. When I stand next to these horses, the top of my head comes up to their front shoulder blades. And this is a steep hill, let me tell you. Holy cow. Now, the American forces were led by a major by the name of Andrew Holmes. He was in charge of doing the actual land invasion of the island. And he led almost 700, I've heard in reports, American troops on the island and assaulted this exact spot. Now, we're going to have to use our imagination a little bit. Back in 1814, we did not have a whole lot of vegetation up here. this was in fact an open field. So the American forces had to assault this position on an open field, almost to think of like Pickett's charge to a degree at Gettysburg, to get your mind in the same zone. Well, the British knew what direction the Americans were going to come, because in this direction over here is flatter ground. Behind me here, it's steep. Over here, it's steep. And over here, it is a drop-off. So there was really only one spot that could create a decent assault. Because the British knew where they were coming and when they would approximately assault, they had their 16-inch cannons trained on that specific flat open area. Now, even a complete novice would understand open ground against prepared troops with a cannon lining the entire area. You're looking at a very formidable fight. And it failed. As soon as the Americans came out of the tree line, the British opened up. And based off that, well, the heavy losses they sustained compelled the Americans to withdraw. Now, it was reported that there were 13 killed and 51 wounded. Among the killed was Major Andrew Holmes himself. Seeing this tremendous casualties and just how bad it was to try and take this fort, the Americans deemed to pull back. They would not make it a second attempt, and this fort would actually stay in British hands throughout the end of the war. And we are currently inside of Fort George, which after the war the Americans renamed Fort Holmes. Now this fort only had one main purpose. It was a defensive fort. Due to unfortunate timing, I'm not able to get inside the main stockade building. I came here about 4 or 5 days after it closed for the season, which is a bit of a shame. Now here is a drawing of what Fort Holmes originally looked like. Back in 1814, this place could house 2 12-pound guns, but in the early 1815 time period, the British had planned to make a pivot mount here at the fort. Now, by 1817, there were 18-pound guns on large platforms facing down the ridge. Now, in comparison to most forts, Fort Holmes is pretty darn small. Pretty doggone small. And given that this was originally intended to be a stockade, it kind of makes sense. You don't want a large area to have a minimal amount of people in. You want to make it small. And given that this was mainly defensive, you're definitely going to want to be able to defend it easily with the least amount of people, especially when you start taking casualties. Still, this is quite the place. So yeah, that's Fort Holmes. really wish I could have been inside the stockade building, but, you know, we must use the tools at our disposal. Do what we can do. Now, I have to say, when I first planned this trip here in October, I had expected to see a lot more fall colors, but what colors that there are here on the island, absolutely spectacular. I definitely recommend, no matter the time of year, if you can come to Mackinaw Island, please do so. It is so filled with history, so many scenic spots. I could go on for weeks of all the scenic places here. But yeah, if you liked what you saw, please drop a like. If you think I deserve it, hit that subscribe button. And see you in the next one. Back down the stairs. At least it's easier going down than it is coming up. Okay, here we go.